Richard Holloway stepped off the plane at the small regional airport, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. After a grueling month-long consulting job in Singapore, he was eager to return to the familiar sights and sounds of home. He had imagined pulling into the long gravel driveway, hearing the distant neigh of horses, and seeing the comforting outline of the old red barn against the afternoon sky. Instead, as he drove toward the family farm, an unfamiliar skyline loomed in the distance. His heart pounded as he turned onto what should have been his driveway, but instead of the weathered wooden gate, he was met with a sleek iron fence and a towering hotel sign reading, "The Grand Summit Resort." The land that had been in his family for generations was gone. The rolling pastures, the orchard his grandfather had planted, even the small pond where he had learned to fish, vanished beneath layers of concrete and steel. He threw the car into park and jumped out, his chest tightening with disbelief. A group of workers bustled near the entrance, unloading supplies and preparing the site for further construction. Richard stormed toward them, his fists clenched. "Hey, what the hell is this? Where's my family's farm?" he demanded, his voice edged with anger and confusion. A man in a neon safety vest turned around, his face wrinkled with apprehension. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but this is private property. You need to step back." "Private property? This is my property. My family has owned this land for decades. Where's my house? Where's my barn?" Richard's voice cracked as he gestured wildly at the modern facade of the resort. The worker sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I don't know the details, but the Homeowners Association, HOA, took over the land last month. Something about unpaid fees and property rights." He hesitated before adding, "Karen Reynolds led the effort. She's the HOA president." Richard's stomach twisted into a knot. Karen Reynolds. He remembered her well. The self-righteous, power-hungry woman who had always treated his family's farm as an eyesore in her vision of a modern community. She had never hidden her distaste for the Holloways, always pushing for new developments and stricter regulations. His fingers curled into fists as rage bubbled within him. This wasn't just a bureaucratic oversight. This was a calculated move. They had stolen his home, his family's legacy, and turned it into a playground for wealthy tourists. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. He couldn't afford to lose control. If Karen Reynolds and the HOA thought they could erase his family's history without a fight, they were gravely mistaken. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. Richard Holloway wasn't a man who backed down easily. If they wanted a battle, he would give them one. Later that evening, Richard met his younger sister, Sarah, at the old barn, the only structure that hadn't been demolished yet. It stood on the far edge of the property, its wooden beams weathered but sturdy. Sarah had rushed over as soon as she heard what happened, just as devastated as he was. "There has to be something we can do," she said, her voice filled with determination as she rummaged through the remnants of their childhood. As they sifted through the dust-covered remains of their past, Sarah pulled out a heavy wooden box from beneath a pile of old burlap sacks. "Richard, look at this," she whispered, brushing off the thick layer of dust. The initials, JH. Their grandfather, James Holloway, were carved into the lid. Richard's hands trembled as he lifted the latch. Inside, they found stacks of yellowed documents, bound together with twine. The papers contained old property deeds, legal agreements, and handwritten notes in their grandfather's careful script. Sarah gasped as she scanned the pages. "Richard, these aren't just records. Some of these mention land protections dating back nearly a century. Look at this clause here. Our land was placed under a historical preservation agreement years ago. If this still holds, the HOA had no legal right to take it." Hope sparked in Richard's chest for the first time since he had arrived. Their grandfather had always been meticulous, documenting everything. Now those very records might be the key to reclaiming their home. "We need a lawyer," Richard said, determination sharpening his voice. "If Karen Reynolds and the HOA think they can steal from us, they're about to get a hell of a fight." Richard hires Marcus, a sharp and well-respected lawyer with a reputation for taking on corrupt organizations. Marcus carefully examines the documents Richard found in the barn and confirms that they hold significant legal weight. Together they file a lawsuit against Karen Reynolds, the HOA, and the developers behind the Grand Summit Resort. The legal process, however, is slow and grueling, with Karen's team filing motions to dismiss the case at every turn. Meanwhile, Richard and Sarah continue gathering evidence. They interview past victims of Karen's land grabs and build a case proving the HOA's history of unethical dealings. As tensions rise, Richard finds himself under increasing pressure, but he refuses to back down. Karen retaliates viciously. She spreads false rumors about Richard and Sarah, claiming they had abandoned the farm long before it was seized. She uses her influence to turn some community members against them, making it seem as if Richard is fighting for personal gain rather than justice. Worse yet, Karen files a countersuit, claiming the Holloway farm had fallen into disrepair and was a danger to the community. Her goal is clear: to drain Richard's resources and credibility. Marcus warns Richard that they need more than just old documents to win the case. They need undeniable proof that Karen and the developers acted illegally. A local journalist, Emily Carter, picks up the story and becomes intrigued by the evidence Richard has gathered. She publishes a scathing article exposing Karen Reynolds and the HOA's pattern of land seizures. The article gains traction, drawing national attention. News outlets begin covering the case, putting immense pressure on Karen and her allies. However, the media attention is a double-edged sword. While it forces Karen onto the defensive, it also brings unwanted scrutiny to Richard's family. Sarah and their young daughter Emma are harassed by strangers who either support Karen or see an opportunity for their own gain. Despite the difficulties, Richard remains focused on the fight. As the legal battle intensifies, Richard makes a breakthrough. While combing through his grandfather's documents again, he discovers a hidden map tucked between the pages of an old ledger. The map reveals a network of underground springs and wetlands running beneath the property, land protected by environmental laws. Realizing the importance of this discovery, Richard contacts an environmental lawyer who confirms that any construction on this land would be a direct violation of state and federal regulations. Armed with this newfound evidence, Richard prepares to strike the biggest blow yet against Karen and the developers. The battle for the Holloway farm is far from over, but for the first time, Richard feels that victory is within reach.